I've been playing video games all my life. I grew up with the GameCube, and when we got it, GameStop had a promotion going on where every GameCube sold came with a copy of The Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition. This disc had a demo of the Wind Waker, the original Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, a retrospective video for the Zelda series, and a promotional video for the Wind Waker. But I'm here specifically to talk about Ocarina of Time. Some people say it's the best Zelda game. Some people say it's a perfect game. It's not. There are some flaws there, and nostalgia doesn't make those go away. Don't get me wrong, I love Ocarina of Time. This game made me the man I am today. This game instilled me with an undying love not only for Zelda, but for gaming in general. This game is why I have an unhealthy obsession with swords. But we can't learn from the mistakes if we pretend they're not there. Originally released in 1998, when the most mind-blowing graphics ever seen had people's fingers all fused together into one big blocky hand. A little boy sleeps in one night, then the fairy goes a dingly-dangly-doo, and the talking tree sends him on a quest to slay evil and fend off the advances of a horny fish. Then, by the power of puberty, he awakens the sages and stabs a demon in the face. This game's almost 30 years old now, we all know the story. It's about the adventure, the people you help along the way, the life-or-death battles, the devious traps and puzzles, the treasures and tools you use to move forward. It's about the legend. But what makes it a legend? The fact that this game was built with care, everything was thought through, mostly. The world and dungeons are all well designed, things are made to test the player without being too absurd, and not to mention, it was Zelda's first break into the world of 3D. Every Zelda game before this was a top-down 2D adventure game, except Zelda 2, which was a side-scroller. For the first time, you could feel truly immersed in the land of Hyrule, but the change doesn't come without a few growing pains. First of which is probably the most complained about thing in this game, Navi the Fairy. She serves as your tutorial, abruptly interrupting the gameplay to tell you how to do the thing you were just about to do. Yes, it's annoying, but I can see the necessity. Imagine you're playing this game for the first time with no prior knowledge of how anything works. Some things need to be explained. Imagine going through the whole game not knowing how the targeting system works. Sometimes you might need a hint on how to beat some enemies. She comes in handy there. That being said, Navi really sucks. She's not a terrible idea, just a bad execution. There's some things that need explaining, and many, many more that don't, and she explains all of them. And you know what irks me the most? When you reach the boss room of the water temple, she says, "Be careful, that's not normal water," without interrupting the gameplay. And in the Shadow Temple, when that ship hits the wall, again, she chimes in without interruption, which means they knew. They knew how to make every interaction with Navi go like this, but they chose to make her swat the controller out of your hand at every given opportunity. While Navi might be the most annoying little turd in existence, she has her uses. And I can think of two things in this game with less use than Navi. One of those things is the Giant's Knife. You make your way through a series of bombable walls in Goron City, and this big guy offers to sell you a weapon. You buy it and think, "Oh yeah, big two-handed sword, this thing's gonna kick so much ass." Then you swing it twice and it breaks. It makes the weapons in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom look sturdy. That's 200 rupees for a sword-shaped Deku stick. And you go back to the guy who sold it to you and he says, "I know my product sucks. Wanna buy another one? No refunds, by the way." The other thing, less useful than Navi, is the Bomb Chew. It's a bomb that runs along the floor, walls, and ceiling before exploding. Sounds good. However, these things are nearly impossible to aim! If it hits the wall dead on, it goes straight up. Okay, fine, but if it touches the wall at any sort of angle, it skews off in whatever direction it feels like going. You'd expect this one to go at a more upward angle, but instead it ends up inside the floor. And there are only 2 places in the entire game you actually need them. Once in Ganon's castle, and once in the Spirit Temple, and even with the targeting, it just barely clips what I'm aiming for. As for the minigame built around these things, it's terrible. The only reason you'd ever play it is to get the big bomb bag or the heart piece, but the prize you get is randomized, and they don't tell you which one it is until after you pay. It could be what you want, only to have a chicken deliberately step into the path of your final bomb chew, or some rupees, or something to remind you of all the years this atrocious minigame has shaved off of your life. Nobody likes this minigame, and if you do, well, I got news for you, buddy.
No, you don't. You've been lying to yourself.
At least we still have useful items, like the slingshot, and the bow, and the hookshot, but I've got a question for you. When's the last time you played this game on the N64 or the GameCube and tried to aim these things in first person? The aiming controls are rough. First off, your ups and downs are inverted, with no option to change that, which was a very common thing in the early days of 3D gaming, so you just had to get used to pulling down to look up. Also, these controls are a little too sensitive. They don't allow for more fine adjustments to your aim. You try to move just a little to the side and whoop, too far. This leads to problems when you need to make a precise shot on a short timer, and not even the Great Fairy can help you with that, but at least you get to look at her big triangular nose! The people of Hyrule are very diverse. You've got your Hylians, the ordinary people, the Zora, fish people who live in the waterways, the Kokiri, children of the forest who never grow old, and the mountain-dwelling Gorons. And let me tell you, the Gorons are stupid. The thing about them is they eat rocks in order to survive, which is pretty cool, but they're starving, because all of their rocks are inside of Dodongo's cavern, and the entrance is blocked with a giant rock. That would be like if you were starving and you couldn't open the refrigerator because there's a giant cheeseburger in the way.
I can't eat this. It has tomatoes on it!
You could spin it to say they're worried about the monsters getting out, but even then, starvation wouldn't be an issue. They've got these rocks 10 feet from their front door, and these big-ass rocks right here, and more of them blocking the door between Goron City and the forest. This room's full of rocks! The mountain they live on is made of rock. That's enough to feed the entire Goron race for thousands of years. The problem isn't a lack of food, it's that the Gorons are suicidally picky eaters. They'd rather starve themselves to extinction than eat rocks that aren't from Dodongo's cavern. I don't like onions, but if that was the only food available to me, I'd eat them. I wouldn't be happy about it, but it's better than being dead. And their leader, Darunia, he could easily slap the other Gorons and tell them to man up and eat what they got. But he's got a better idea, and that is to dance and then send a little kid armed with a knife and a piece of tree bark into a dangerous, trap-filled monster den to slay a giant fire-breathing dinosaur. How is this Goronic moron the leader of anything? At least the shopkeepers are smarter, even if their businesses are doomed to fail, because you only really need to buy the Deku Shield in the opening, and then you can beat the game without ever going into another shop again. It's always an option to buy things, but almost everything for sale can be found for free. If you lose your shield or one of your tunics to a like and can't kill it fast enough to get them back, then I can see buying replacements. But aside from that, why bother buying arrows when you can just break a pot? Why drop 200 rupees on a fish when you can scoop one up for free 10 feet from the shop? The only thing you can't find for free would be the potions. The red one fully restores your health when you drink it. You know what else gives you a full heal? Fairies. Plus, they automatically revive you when you die, so why bother buying the red potion when you can just bottle a better healing item for free? Instead of spending your money on things that just fall out of the grass, you could use it to play some of the various mini-games all over Hyrule. You can get a horse by doing one of those, and heart pieces. Also, I like the fishing, even if the fish you're after never actually bites. Get back here, you little... But of course, you can't go fishing as an adult until after you beat the water temple, unless you planted magic beans, which I didn't do. But anyway, the water temple. It's probably the most hated dungeon in the game. Having to raise and lower the water level to reach different areas can make it confusing for new players. I've played this game so many times that I can navigate this dungeon with my eyes closed, but that does not make it any less tedious. The layout isn't a problem. It's mainly from the iron boots and the way you have to change the water level. The boots aren't a bad idea, it's just the execution. You have to pause, equip the boots, slowly sink down, walk to where you need to be, pause again, take them off, slowly float back up, and realize that this is the one place you need to keep the boots on and hookshot out of the water, over and over again, for each underwater room. Changing the water level requires you to play the ocarina at one of these wall panels when it could have easily been switches you just hit with your sword. They have no problem tying the water level to a regular switch in this room, but in the main hub of the dungeon, you need to stand straight up against the wall panel with Link's face pressed into the wall and do the doo-doo-doo and wait for that to play out, and then you have to do that almost as often as you turn the lights on or off in your own home. Combat is simple and enjoyable. You can block and dodge and mash B to swing your sword, but occasionally you get a fight where you're just waiting. Now you can hit them, and then you're waiting. Most other combat encounters feel good though, where you're looking for an opening to strike, focusing on them with the targeting and strafing around, but one thing that I don't like is that the shield is a little too strong. You can block almost everything. There are some cases where it's better to dodge and counterattack, and more often than not, it's safer and easier to hide behind the shield the whole time. Your shield doesn't break, there's no stamina limiting how much you can guard, and a heavier attack won't knock you off balance, leaving you open to a follow-up attack. And there are so few attacks that you can't block, like the Iron Knuckle. It's a big man with a big axe. Makes sense your shield wouldn't stand up to it. But then again, you can block explosions, a rolling 30-ton reptile, a volcanic eruption, a sword twice the size of your body swung by a demon, but a dangling spider? Out of the question. At least with the targeting, the camera's positioned well most of the time, but outside of battle, the camera kinda sucks. You can't freely adjust it. If you hit L or Z on the N64, it recenters the camera behind Link, or you could press up on the C-stick and look in first person to orient the camera that way. The way the camera works can actually make it difficult to walk along a straight, narrow path, and in the Fire Temple, when you make the run to the Megaton Hammer, you have to run along a narrow spiral staircase while on a short timer. Doing this in a straight line is hard enough, but when you don't have the time to correct the camera while running in a perfect spiral, it always takes 100% of my concentration to do this. Aside from that, the rest of the game is designed great. The dungeon layouts make sense, nothing is too frustrating, but there is one spot in the entire game that I feel is done poorly. It's one hallway in particular inside the Gerudo Fortress. You have to sneak around and take down the guards as necessary, In this one hallway, there's a guard already patrolling towards the doorway you came through, and you can't see her. You're gonna get caught by her the first time, every time, unless you know in advance to stay in the doorway with an arrow ready and shoot her the instant she comes around the corner. And this isn't even an optional room. You need to go in here to free one of the carpenters. That covers just about everything I think is wrong with the game. But what about what they did right? The dungeons, they're all laid out in a way that makes sense. None of them are too confusing, while also not being too easy. The world is large and full of secrets to be found, and they don't just reward you with money that you can't carry any more of. You'll get heart pieces to increase your maximum health. Some are won through minigames, some are found through clever exploration, some require certain items to get, and there's one or two you can skip the required item on with a little creative thinking. They even did the tedious hidden collectibles well. I'm talking about those gold skulltulas. Every 10 of them gets you some sort of reward, and when there's one close by, you can hear it skittering. Some of them only come out at night, making you recheck some areas at different times. The bosses are done well. They're bigger and more dangerous than regular enemies. You can't just run up and start swinging on them. You have to be smart about it, exploit their weaknesses to create an opening before you go in for the kill. The transition into adulthood when you get the Master Sword, seeing how the world's gone to hell in the 7 years you've been sealed away after Ganondorf's rise to power. Your childhood home infested with monsters, the people you met as a kid facing new problems, such as being fed to a dragon, which makes a lot more sense as a problem than not being able to eat exactly what they want. Finding new items, giving you new paths to open, and a sense of wonder thinking of all the new ways you could approach enemies with them. Getting a big two-handed sword that does more damage than the Master Sword, and one that doesn't break either. Sure, the quest for it is kind of a pain in the ass, having to hatch an egg, wake this guy up, trade that chicken for another one, then carrying things around on a timer and trade this for that and that for this and running all over Hyrule, then waiting a few days, but the Big Oron sword is worth the effort. You can't use your shield with it, so you have to get good at dodging, which in my opinion makes the combat more fun. For everything they did wrong, they did so much more right, making the flaws less noticeable, but they are still there. I know we got the 3DS remake in 2011, and even then, the only things I mentioned earlier that they fixed were the boots being made into an item, and they fine-tuned the control stick, making the first-person aiming better and making it easier to maneuver around narrow pathways, even with the old style of camera control. Everything else I talked about is still there, though.
And there you have it. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time isn't perfect. It has its flaws, but does that mean it's a bad game? No. A game can be flawed and still be great. There's no such thing as perfection. No matter how well something is done, there will always be room for improvement. And with that, I leave you with King Zora's Slow Shuffle. For every GameCube sold, it came with a copy of the Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition that I am holding upside down. Where every GameCube sold came with a...